Thank you, everyone, and good morning. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay respect to elders past and present, and to say how pleased we are that there are so many First Nations people in this room today, and to pay respect and acknowledge them too. This session is looking at the experience of people who are locked out, who don't get critical consumer protections because of where they live or because of how they're supplied, or they face structural barriers thrown up by the way the market's delivering energy to them. We wanted to focus on the needs of those people this morning for three reasons. First, as we've heard repeatedly over the last 2 days, and we all know, energy is an essential service. We have now what is a mountain of evidence that tells us that going without energy directly harms people's health and well-being. And after hearing the presentations this morning, you know, that mountain is getting bigger and turning into an Everest that we just can't ignore anymore. The second is that governments are currently running a process asking whether our consumer protections are fit for purpose now and in the future. And so it's important that that discussion includes the experience of people who don't have the same level of protection in the market, and that that process is ambitious in thinking about how we include people in those discussions. And third, the people in this room are really important to drive and support those reforms. So you're a really critical group of people to hear and understand these issues. I'm pleased to welcome what is a panel of really powerful advocates and reformers with significant expertise and experience. I'll introduce each of the panel and invite them to speak. So I'm going to begin with Trina. Trina Jones is the New South Wales Rental Commissioner, working for a fair, quality, affordable rental experience. Trina advises the New South Wales Government on policy programs and legislative reform to improve renting in New South Wales, and she's an expert on housing issues, including as the CEO of Homelessness New South Wales. So please, over to you, Trina. And if you want to use the left hand.
Good morning, and thank you for having me here today. It's great to see the room and the energy for the energy conference. So before I begin, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and extend that respect to our Aboriginal colleagues in the room, and recognise that access to safe, affordable and healthy housing remains a critical part of closing the gap. It's a privilege to be part of this forum, which puts consumers at the centre of thinking about the energy future. And where I'm sitting right now as the first New South Wales Rental Commissioner, that couldn't be ever more important. In New South Wales, about 1 million rental homes are in this state. It's the largest rental market in Australia. And we have about over 2 million renters. And my job as the Rental Commissioner is to regulate the rental market. So I work in fair trading, whose mission is to ensure fair and safe markets for goods, services and homes in New South Wales. And increasingly what we see in the rental market is that it's not always a safe marketplace, and so we need to have stronger protections to support people in that sector. When we start to think about the challenges in the rental market, I often talk about the triangle of challenge. So we've got fair, quality and affordable. And it's been put to me by renters that you can never have all three. And what that means is, when we talk about fair, is that you can assert your rights under the law. When we talk about quality, it means, is your home safe to live in? And is it healthy? And is it comfortable? And this is really critical as it relates to energy and the just transition to a green future. Because when it comes to the intersection between energy poverty, inequality and renters are often the person who's the last person on the list. Our reforms and our policies around energy are for homeowners and people who have agency and choice and control over the energy efficiencies of their homes, which we know renters don't. And so some of the things that we think about is, you know, we've got a huge challenge already with the standard of rental homes. When we start to think about kind of some of the challenges behind this in the sector, I want to share some kind of facts and figures to centre this discussion. So we've got, as I said, about 1 million rental homes. Now, of the homes that we have in our rental market today, about 1 in 3 are in the rental market. Now, what we know is that by 2050, we're estimating that 8 out of 10 homes will be homes that have existed today. Many of those homes were built before we even had building standards, building codes. So they're already not necessarily in good condition. We're not going to be able to build our way into a green energy transition for brand new homes. And we're going to have to recognise that the homes we have now, 8 in 10 of those are going to be still in the rental market by 2050. Now, when we go out to look at rental homes, let me tell you, they're inconsistent at best and dangerous at worst. The conditions on the living standards can be very poor and put people in very precarious situations. As it relates to the energy standards of those homes, we have a long way to go. We know from our colleagues in the Better Renting team, and I can see some people here today, from the reports that they delivered around cold and costly and sweaty and stressed. We went out and spoke to renters last year with our colleagues in the Tenants Union and also the Sydney Alliance, and we went and spoke to renters in their own communities, and this is what they told me. I heard from mothers who said they had to take their babies out of the cot at night in the summer and get them down to the 24-hour Kmart because it was too hot to be in the home at night. People who are making decisions between putting the gas heater on and having something to eat. So this is a very live and very serious issue for people. At the same time, they're experiencing affordability challenges in the rental market. So I don't have to labour the problem, everyone in this room knows that, but I will tell you what some of the things we're doing in the New South Wales Government to respond. So my role as Rental Commissioner is to strengthen laws to protect renters. And a big part of my work is investigating minimum energy efficiency standards in rental homes. And that work has kicked off. We're working with our colleagues in the Department of Climate Change, Energy and Water to understand what that might need to look like and what are some of the challenges that we have. A big challenge for us is the people who provide the rental homes only stay in the market for up to 6 years. So I said we've got these million rental homes, we've got 2 million renters, the largest rental market in Australia, but our landlords are highly transient. They're keeping their homes for only up to 6 years, and they don't always have the capital investment to make those upgrades. So we have to think about what are the types of things we need to change in the system to support improved housing standards and better quality of life for people in rental homes. We're also just off the back of finishing the disclosure trials, which have given us a rich data set and insight into what it would mean to disclose the energy standards of rental homes at the point of lease and obviously at the point of sale as well. Another piece of work that we're doing is making sure that we're transparent about this condition of a home. And so part of that is through the disclosure, but also we've got a bill before Parliament to require people to disclose embedded networks in rental homes, because too many people are moving into rental homes and then not able to service the energy bill when they actually live there. And so that bill is before Parliament, and we hope that that will progress, because that would mean it's required to disclose that at the point of advertising. Now, I don't have much time, but I will say there's a couple of other initiatives underway. There's over $320 million being invested in social rented homes to support over 24,000 social housing properties to be upgraded to an energy efficiency standard. And that's because we recognise within the government that we want to be a leader in this sector and show what's possible and test and learn so that we can try and replicate that as much as possible in the private market. And there's also investment that will kick off this year for property owners to make upgrades and investments in their home. All of this to be said, none of this design and this future step forward is possible without working with the people who are most impacted. So for me, as Rental Commissioner, I will continue to keep my foot on the ground and my ears listening to the people who are most impacted so we can influence change for safer, better quality homes into the future. And I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Trina. And it's really exciting to hear jurisdictional governments, like so much action happening. I'd now like to introduce Brendon. Brendon is the Director of Policy and Research at National Seniors, leading its advocacy and research teams. He's been at National Seniors since 2015, working on campaigns to improve policy and administrative systems affecting older Australians, but also has significant experience in Queensland through Queensland Council of Social Service. So up to you, Brendon.
Hope this is all right. Yeah, okay, good. Hi everyone. This is my first ever conference at Foresighting, and thank you very much for the invitation and for being on this wonderful panel. Just a little bit about National Seniors, because a lot of people don't know us. A lot of people know CODA. We are a national organisation. We have around 270,000 people who are tied to us in some way. 60,000 of those are paid members, and we do research and advocacy. That's our main reason for being. And through those activities, we hear a lot from older people. But we're not just for people who are, pensioners. self-funded retirees as well, so we go across the spectrum. And it's probably in that context that I'll speak today. It's obvious to everyone else in the room that cost of electricity is one of the biggest issues facing consumers, and it's the same for older people. When we surveyed our members only a month ago, the cost of electricity was the number 2, only just behind private health insurance. And it's in that context where there was a conversation yesterday about perception, and I think that's really critical. People who are older people, and even if they're self-funded retiree, they still are concerned about the cost of energy. So one of the things that we've been advocating around is the issue around the difficulty of shopping around. We were very supportive of the DMO when it came out because we were advocating for a regulated price for energy, because we knew that there were people in the market who can't shop around. They're not digitally literate, and we knew that from our research. We regularly survey our members and supporters around digital literacy, and we know as you get older, it becomes harder and harder to deal with digital technology, and there's less people who can do that. So, but it's not just older people that struggle with digital literacy. It's one thing to be able to use your phone, it's another thing to be able to shop around. And as many of you know, that's really difficult. Energy made easy, or energy made hard, as we like to call it, is pretty abysmal, really. It's very difficult to know what you're going to pay. And we're in the process of the transition, and through that transition, we're rolling out smart meters. And this is enabling increased tariff options. So we're going from a situation where people have grown up all their lives, understanding flat tariffs, and they're going to face complex, cost-reflective tariffs, which they find hard to understand, and Energy Made Easy can't tell them how much their bill might be. I want to jump ahead to solutions. If we're going to do anything, we want to make sure that Energy Made Easy, you can punch in your number and it tells you how much you've used over the last year, and then it tells you how much a particular plan will cost you. That would be amazing, because that would demystify what it will cost you, because it's linking to your actual use. So complexity, this complexity is everywhere, and older people and younger people are struggling with that complexity. We see it in aged care. People are frustrated with trying to deal with an aged care system that is becoming harder to navigate, and it's the same in the energy space. And I think this complexity is undermining trust, and we've talked a lot about trust in this conference, and I think that's a real important touch point for us. And the other day I was on a bus and I looked over at another bus and there was an ad, and it said, "Australia's most loved energy company." And I went, huh? I'm not sure there's any older people out there who are in love with their energy company. But I think things like that, apologies to the marketing people out here, are actually contributing to the undermining of that trust, I think. So there's a few things that we've been doing. We've been engaging in the smart meters debate, putting in submissions around that, because we're a bit concerned about some of the things around there. When we did, we had people contacting us. We had one woman who contacted us who said, I've been asked to upgrade my meter to a smart meter. What do? I don't really understand. And we said to her, well, and this was, I think, April or May. We said, well, you don't have to currently. It's not compulsory. But after June, I think it was, or July, it will be compulsory. And if you do, and if that happens, you won't have any protection from being shifted on to a different tariff until December. And then in December, you'll have 2 years where you can be protected. And it should have been 3 years, but it got knocked back to 2 years. And then we had a man who contacted us who had been notified by his electricity company that they wanted him to move to a smart meter. And he said, okay, because they said, there'll be lots of benefits for you. And he gets his first bill, and surprise, surprise, he nearly has a heart attack. Because he got a bill shock because it was a different tariff he didn't understand, he didn't change his behaviour. And the last example is a rollout plan for the smart meters, which specifically targets socioeconomic or low socioeconomic communities so that they can, and this is quoted in the plan, so that they can benefit from the technology. And we all know that if you're using these things, you need to be able to afford things like solar, batteries, you need to be able to change your behaviour. And that just didn't sit right with us. So I think there's an issue of trust out there which we need to address, and I'm going to end with a little anecdote about my son, Henry, who I love very much. He's 10 and he's a goose most of the time. And I'm very fond of saying to him, mate, people can only judge you on your actions and your words. They don't know what's inside, they don't know your intentions, they can only judge you on your actions and your words. So I'll just leave that there.
Thank you very much, Brendon. And I'd now like to welcome Caitlin Perry. So Caitlin's worked in the not-for-profit sector for over 40 years and is currently Senior Policy Officer at the Northern Territory Council of Social Services. Caitlin works across a broad range of policy issues that picks up just some little things like climate change and cost of living as well as energy. But she has a particular focus on eradicating energy poverty in the Northern Territory. So thanks, Caitlin.
Thank you very much, Kerry. I'll start off saying I'm not Scottish. I had a Milo-free childhood and I've got a huge amount to say and not very much time to say it in, so I'll probably end up just talking in dot points, and I'll try not to talk too fast. So energy hardship, whatever we call it, in the Northern Territory is widespread and severe, and we know about the impacts of energy hardship. We've seen it in Trina already talked about the impact on renters, and we heard from Lauren and Glenn yesterday, and we're going to hear from Lauren and Vanessa a little bit later this morning too. So before I talk a little bit about why some of the conditions in the Northern Territory and some of the policy issues that impact that, I just thought I'll just, some basic facts about the Northern Territory. You've all seen a map of Australia. You know where the Northern Territory is. You know how big it is. But what you might not know is how few people there are in some of the aspects of the energy system. There are about 264,000 people living in the Northern Territory. In 96,000 dwellings, about 11,000 of which are social housing. About a third of the population is Aboriginal people living in, about half of whom live in remote Northern Territory across a number of communities and homelands. Over half the population of the Northern Territory are renters, and electricity is mostly generated by gas with some diesel, some renewables, including lots of rooftop solar in the towns and some microgrids in communities, although the local residents don't get the benefit of reduced cost of power in those situations. And while there's the NT isn't in the national energy market, there is the NT electricity market, so in theory there is competition, but in reality most consumers have one of the government-owned entities as a retailer, and we have the country's second least loved retailer in Jacana Energy. So I don't think they'd be putting that on buses. Energy use per household in the Northern Territory is really high for a couple of reasons. It's hot, it's really hot, and it's getting hotter as climate change kicks in. And in the southern part of the Northern Territory, it's also really cold in winter. The quality of housing is really bad. The Northern Territory has low minimum energy standards, 5-star for houses, 3.4 for apartments, and that's only for new built housing, and even those standards are not mandatory in remote Northern Territory. And even when the housing is built to 7-star standard, poor quality construction, overcrowding and inadequate maintenance undermine the efficiency of those houses. Overcrowding is severe and common right across the Northern Territory, particularly in remote Northern Territory, which means effectively that households with high energy use and prepayment meters are paying a higher price for electricity. Prepayment meters are a huge issue on their own, and I know that Lauren and Vanessa will talk a little bit more about those. They were imposed in the 1990s, and as we all know, they shift the burden of energy affordability entirely onto customers. I've already mentioned that half the population in the Northern Territory are renters, and Trina's talked about the structural barriers to achieving energy equity for renters. Housing Commission policies, for example, in the Northern Territory don't help. In the top end region where I live, in the semi-tropical north, houses are provided with a fan, an overhead fan, and a space for a box air conditioner. Box air conditioners are not particularly effective in high humidity, and they're expensive to run. They're also very noisy, and they create their own heat, which is awful for your neighbours. The price of energy, the price is set annually by the Northern Territory Government with the Energy Pricing Order, and energy costs in the Northern Territory are subsidised for every household to the tune of about $1,400. And I don't want to be the one arguing for increased energy bills across the Northern Territory, but I do want the Northern Territory Government to reconsider how it spends that massive community service obligation spending every year and apply it in a more targeted way. Prepayment meter tariffs are 3 cents per kilowatt hour more than account customers, and until the 1st of January this year, the time of use tariff had cheap overnight energy and expensive daytime energy. And the Northern Territory Concession Scheme is relatively generous, providing up to $1,200 per household, but eligibility is really narrow, and even then only about 65% of eligible people are members, and the scheme requires annual re-enrolment. So there's some of the conditions that lead to high energy use and some of the policy things. And a few more policy things I want to mention. There's no funded energy advocacy in the Northern Territory. There's no culture or history of consumer participation in decision making or planning. There's a lack of regulatory protections, particularly for customers living in remote Northern Territory. One I want to talk about in particular is the exemption to retail reporting. That means that experiences of remote customers don't appear in annual reporting across the Northern Territory. And it keeps the huge and outrageous number of what we call involuntary self-disconnections out of sight for leaders and decision makers. And I heard somebody the other day describe the role of the Utilities Commission, or one of the key functions, as being to respond to the data being presented by the retailers. No data, no response, and so it goes on. As the invisibility of some other energy customers as well as prepayment users, people using gas as a household fuel, and customers in embedded networks are also not visible in the data. And just one other thing to note about renters, I also note that the Northern Territory has some of the weakest protections for renters generally in the Northern Territory. There's limited access to dispute resolution services. Jacana and Power and Water and Indigenous Energy Service customers can use the Northern Territory Ombudsman, but Rimfire customers, they're a small outfit that have about 750 domestic customers across the Northern Territory. Their customers can only use the NT Office of Consumer Affairs. There's no renewable energy target in the Northern Territory at the moment, and there's certainly no program to prioritise putting solar on social housing. Energy policy is spread across multiple portfolios and departments, and likewise energy efficiency policy. There's also a low level of energy literacy, even at the level of regulators and policymakers. I've got my shame file here, and I could tell you some appalling stories about some of the things that senior departmental staff and ministers have told me, but I just mentioned one thing. I was talking to a senior policy advisor for the Minister of Energy, and I said something about virtual power plants, although having heard yesterday maybe their time is past, maybe this guy was ahead of the curve, but he said to me, what's a virtual power plant? And so there's just, a really low level of literacy, as I say, even in the institutions. Oh, and by the way, the Power and Water Corporation also wheels and deals on the international gas market, as well as being the network and retailer. So some of these things are issues that happen in other jurisdictions too, but it's just the scale and the combination of all of those factors that create an appalling situation for so many customers in the Northern Territory, and particularly for prepayment users in remote Northern Territory. But I do want to say that in all of the institutions I've mentioned, there are people who are passionate about ensuring that people have access to clean, reliable, affordable energy. But we cannot rely on individuals alone for pushing, systemic things. I just want to note that the aim of the Foresighting Forum is to accelerate the shift to an energy system that is affordable, clean and reliable and aligned with the values and expectations of Australians. That does not describe what is happening in the Northern Territory. And I can't help but think that one of the biggest underlying issues is the lack of care, the lack of ambition for energy customers in the Northern Territory. Maybe that's related to state capture by fossil fuel industry. Maybe it's deep institutionalised racism. I'll leave that for others to decide. But as far as I'm aware, the barriers to energy equity are all policy and regulatory. They're not technical issues. I think energy equity in the Northern Territory is totally achievable. And working with partners here, all of you, I think it's entirely possible to both imagine and implement a different energy future for the Territory. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. And now I'm going to introduce our last two speakers who we're speaking jointly because they both had been working on the Right to Power project, which you were briefed on yesterday, but to talk about particularly prepayment meters. So introducing Vanessa Davis. Vanessa has over 20 years of experience in social research work, evaluation and data input and analysis. She has the language, cultural knowledge and expertise to conduct research in Aboriginal communities. And she's a senior researcher, and I'm really sorry, Vanessa, because I meant to check my saying of Tangentyere Council. Tangentyere, thank you. I knew I was going to get that wrong, thank you. And then also Lauren Mellor, who you saw yesterday. So Lauren is the Clean Energy Communities Co-Director at Original Power, who's leading programs and teams of people in the design, implementation and assessment of community-driven projects to ensure First Nations people play a leading role in the clean energy transition. ECA has been very proud to be a collaborator on the Right to Power project, so I'm going to hand over to you now to speak a bit more about that.
Ngejeno ganala muragodi mabana del pankale jage man ke nyate nyan nyaral per mankemal nonna negol podir mal nyendere mal ngejena nunagan ndelam arpan mabul wajak today. I'll translate that. That is, I'd like to acknowledge the trios of this country who we all gathered around here to share our thoughts and about the energy consumers that we all struggle to have in our own jurisdiction. So, yes, thanks EWEC to invite us here again. It's been a pleasure coming into the conference to talk about the struggle that we have in the Northern Territory with the smart prepaid meters that is rolled out into our communities. There's a question I was listening yesterday about visibility and non-visibility. At the moment, people in the Northern Territory that has prepaid smart meters connected to their house, to the Jakarta Energy, we are not visible, we're invisible, because when we ring up to report something or if we lose something in their house, they only recognise us as a number. So not all of our mob in the community understand that when you ring Jakarta, you have to report the NIM number and the smart meter numbers, and in that way they can recognise us through that, but they won't recognise us as a household tenant who's been paying rent in that house for so long. So for most of us in the NT, most of us don't have a proper good numeracy literacy and don't understand all these little gadgets and digits and that we have to go through to get a new prepaid smart meter to pay off. If we lose one, we have to go through that system, and that's how we get recognised through the Jakarta Energy, is through the NIM or our numbers. So to them, we're just numbers. To people like you guys, that we are normal people, are struggling to get by daily to keep our energy on, power on. Especially in the past, last extreme weather, we have really big problem with topping up our energy because, like Caitlin was saying, our housing equality in the NT is not really standard, as it's so poor that every time we top up energy, we sort of like generating, we using up, and we don't have much electricity goods in the houses. We probably have fridge, washing machine and TV, and that's it, and the fan going and the aircon, swampy aircon, but that still chews up a lot of the power. So imagine people that's got chronic illness, they struggle to keep it on to keep their medication cool. Or if the power goes off, it's not a new story, but it's our food spoiled too. So our mob get paid fortnightly. Most of us don't work like I work, but a lot of people in our community are old and fragile, and most of them need company or some sort of support to go and reconnect themselves back to the power. But they, especially the remote mob, they struggle because their shops are only open till 8 to 4 or 9 to 5, and then they have power outage until next morning unless they got connection to someone in the nearest town to put on the power to help them out. At the moment, when we had that extreme 40, about 2 weeks of 40 plus in Alice Springs there alone, people were buying their power. They was topping up bit by bit. Some of them was run out of power and it's so hot outside. Growing up, the weather was different, but now the weather's changed, maybe because of the climate change, and it's so hot that we can't even sit under a tree to keep cool in the shade. We have to rely on fan and air conditioner to stay cool nowadays. At the moment, we're going to expect a really high cold weather, like Caitlin said. In the NT, there's a hot weather, and then comes winter, we have really extreme cold weather. So we can't win in the NT because we got two kinds of weather that we have to cater for, and then the pressure to keep that power on is really so much pressure on for one person or individual, even for an elderly couple. So what I'm saying is that when we want to ring up for any problems in our household to Chicana, they just only know us by numbers. We're moving on to the new era now, and then we're still behind. Our people are still behind in trying to catch up to be on the same level as the people that's providing the energy. But it's really hard. I can tell you it's really hard, and it's a struggle for all of us Aboriginal people.
Thank you.
Lauren? Thanks, Vanessa. I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners as well. I think we've spoken a lot about the prepayment experience here over the last couple of days, and for many of you who've been involved in this project, we're starting to understand that this needs to be an urgent reform priority for everyone working in the energy policy sector, for all governments using prepayment, relying on it. As part of this project, the Right to Power work, we spoke to a lot of retailers about the justification behind the prepayment rollout, and it's uneven across the country where it's in use. It's had different durations. In some places like South Australia, it's quite new and has been introduced amidst a lot of additional scrutiny and a lot of additional requirements around consumer protections for prepayment customers that we don't have in jurisdictions that have a longer history of relying on prepayment. But often the response we get from retailers and governments that rely on prepayment is that this is some sort of assistance to particularly First Nations customers who are primarily targeted by this supply arrangement, and that this is some way of that customer avoiding debt, and therefore it is a convenient tool that they've created for the benefit of that customer. But the reality obviously is that the consumer protections that form the foundations of our national electricity retail rules and other protections, these are the costs that the retailer is avoiding by lumping people into a cohort of customers that are excluded from protections. It means that, I think the more honest answer from a retailer, rather that this is a budgeting tool or some way to assist prepayment and low-income customers, it's actually very convenient, obviously, to the retailers because they get to avoid debt accrual on their own books, and they get to avoid all of the requirements that National Retail Rule Protections would require of the retailer to not breach their licence and to actually offer the types of targeted support that customers who are struggling to keep up with essential energy bills should be entitled to. And so, reflecting on how we're going to talk about this, we really just looked at the experience of a prepayment customer versus what a national energy market customer could expect to experience. What's the reality of the consumer protections and how do they affect your experience and of accessing energy? And Lloyd Pigram, one of our collaborators for the Right to Power project sitting over there, made the observation that, you know, prepayment customers are often labelled or tarred with the brush that they are irresponsible in some way. They're accruing debts and they need to be put on this special type of supply arrangement for their own good. But Lloyd made the observation that prepayment customers are in fact the best customer a retailer can have, because not only do they pay on time, every time, they pay ahead of time. They are paying up front to access an energy service that otherwise retailers would be required to have an entire infrastructure built around to offer the types of support that they are obligated to under their retail licences for other customers. You know, compare the experience of prepayment customers where you've got 49 average disconnections happening a year across those jurisdictions to less than 1% of customers in the national energy market who experience a disconnection in any given year. Why is that so? Because we have consumer protections locked in and an obligation on the retailer that disconnection should be, for every other customer, a last resort. And that happens in practice. The risk is on a retailer if a customer is disconnected unfairly without the types of support that look like, you can accrue up to $500 now as a debt in any given quarter before disconnection is even considered as an option for that customer. That's not offered to prepayment customers who are disconnected as soon as that last cent on your meter expires. Similarly, for hardship protections, most prepayment customers, because of the way these supply arrangements have been organised in WA, South Australia, Far North Queensland and the Northern Territory, those customers are fundamentally excluded from national retail rules. They have different names in different places, but it all means the same thing, that you are not a customer, you're a number, you're a meter number, and that's your interface with your retailer. So any sort of targeted support that identifies that customer may be experiencing domestic violence or that customer may be experiencing financial hardship, you are automatically excluded on the basis that you're not a person. You are in fact invisible to the retailer as a customer, and therefore no targeted support can be tailored or offered. So we see that even in the fundamental case that if you are in financial hardship, and that is demonstrated through multiple disconnections in any given month, a customer, as we've heard through this research, can reach out to their retailer and ask for support, identifying themselves as being in financial hardship. Because there's no metric for a prepayment customer to be identified as in financial hardship, they're on their own. There is no support being offered. And I'm pleased to say through some of the spotlight we've been able to shine on those experiences through this work, we are now seeing some retailers like Horizon Power in West Australia actually pick up the mantle of saying, yes, we need to have specific metrics for prepayment customers to identify those in hardship and expand our product, our financial hardship products, to accommodate those customers and to have some sort of appropriate response. This is the bare minimum type of offering that we're still fighting for retailers to recognise that customer experience. So I think there are big challenges ahead in terms of what we need to do for prepayment customers. Most urgently, we spoke a little bit about it yesterday, is saying when is it absolutely inappropriate and dangerous to be disconnecting people? It's during the extreme heat events that we've been having recently. This is a fundamental task that I think we can all work on together to keep the pressure on retailers to adopt heatwave protection measures. I mean, I think we need to start with prepayment customers, but this should obviously be across the board that those protections apply, and we recognise the types of experiences and externalised costs that start to happen when we disconnect people during extreme weather. We've talked a bit about expanding closing the concessions gap for customers. I think that's really urgent as well. fundamentally, prepayment customers are excluded from the concessions that most other customers take for granted. So you're doubly disadvantaged in the sense that you're often paying more for your power and you're excluded from the types of support that would be necessary to keep you connected. I just want to mention one thing, because I think there are some models out there that we can look to say, and I'm not sure that will ever be possible to make prepayment absolutely align with the types of consumer protections that other customers experience. So I think we need to move quickly away from racialised tools like prepayment metering and quickly towards the transition to renewable energy in those communities that need it most. In South Australia, the Department of Mines and Energy, which most recently brought in prepayment, what they've done, their initial intention was to gradually increase the tariff price from 10 cents a kilowatt hour up to the standard in South Australia. They recognise that it's a capacity to pay issue. Many of these communities do not have the same capacity to pay because the cost of living is extraordinary in remote areas across the board. And so recognising that they couldn't incrementally increase that tariff and not start to see the wave of disconnections that we have in places like the Northern Territory, instead what they've done is they've just procured 3 microgrids as part of their remote area energy supply program, partly federal government funded, partly South Australian government funded. Those microgrids will maintain the cost of power at 10 cents a kilowatt hour for prepayment communities and enable the retailer and the government-owned utility to reduce the cost of generation at the same time. That's the type of clever thinking and investment we need to start seeing, instead of what we're seeing in West Australia, which will be another couple of thousand customers being brought onto prepayment arrangements in the near future, and we're likely to see those arrangements expanded unless we tackle affordability at the generation side as well as the household side. So I'll leave it there, but there are some examples out there and light at the end of the tunnel.
No, thank you, Lauren. And I told you they were as a panel of powerful advocates. So I'm going to tread into the program just one more time to ask each of you, and I'm really sorry because I think we probably run out of time to do Slido questions from the floor. And I've had a quick look at them, and I think most of them are targeted at particular issues. So please feel free. I'm dobbing you in to go and approach the panel afterwards and during morning tea to ask the questions. But I wanted to ask each of you what you would like the people in this room to do to help address your problems. What are the things you want this room to actually lean into, to take action on, that you think could actually work around? Because you can see from the slide, when we actually, as we were developing this panel, Kimberly from ECA put together this table because you can see this kind of compounding barriers that have come up in the course of this conversation. Which also, and so the urgency of addressing those barriers is obviously, severe. So anyway, so throw to you, what's something you'd like the people in this room to do? So I might start with Trina.
Okay, so I think what I would say is we need to continue to be committed to equality with this just transition to the energy transition. And so what I would say to people is recognise, yes, the complexity from the kind of energy technical aspects, but also the behaviour change that's needed to, particularly as it relates to the rental market, get us to the position where homes are delivered in a high quality standard, where people are protected to live in comfort and good health, and they can get access and support to assert their rights under the law. So we need people to talk about the issues, to understand and sit with some of the complexity. Yes, it's true that we need to increase the quality of homes, but it's also true that to do that, we rely on hundreds of thousands of private citizens to make investments in the homes to do that. And so the transition there is complex and it's urgent. And so I would ask people to engage with that in a more complex way than just saying, we'll just do it. Okay, because we know that's really difficult. And so I would also say, if there's any technical experts in the room, I've got a wish list item. Please someone I keep saying this at every forum I go, please someone make something that a renter can go, I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in a household of 3 people, and what is my likely cost to live in this house knowing that this cost is X stars rated? Please someone make that. If someone is making that, can they tell me? Someone's got their hand up. Great. Come and talk to me afterwards. Okay, great. That would be great. We would love to see renters be able to say, not only can I pay the rent, but can I afford to live in this house? Because that's the real struggle that people are having in terms of affordability, rent and living costs. So thank you, Kerry.
Thank you. Luis Gonzalez has just offered to do that for free. So there's a benchmark being set for everybody else's call to action, please. So Brendon, go.
The one thing, I've got a list of like 50 things, so come and see me afterwards. But the one thing that we're sort of advocating for is that if you get on a cost-reflective tariff, that when you get your bill, you get two prices. You get the DMO and you get the bill, the price for the market offer that you chose. Whichever one is cheaper is the one you pay. And if the one that is cheaper is the DMO, then you get some information on your bill which says, under your market offer, you could have done better if you'd done X, Y, and Z. Because people need information at the billing point, and we've created this DMO, but it's kind of hidden somewhere. And it's supposed to be a protection, and it's supposed to be there to give the retailers enough money. So why can't we?
Okay, that's one for the regulators out there. So Caitlin, I'm getting the pressure from the back to be brief, please.
Okay, is this working? Great, I'll be really quick. As much as I can. I think the Northern Territory government has to be held accountable. It's got to be accountable to the people of the Northern Territory, but in terms of Kerry's question and what people in this room can do, I think any time you're in a position where you're talking to Northern Territory government people or any of the institutions involved in energy policy or broader tax policy, because that's also got an impact on energy equity in the Northern Territory, ask the Northern Territory government what are they doing to reduce the outrageous 79,000 instances of self-disconnection every year. What are they doing to improve energy equity? And I just think anything you can do to help hold the Northern Territory government to account would be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Vanessa.
Yeah, I'm with Caitlin there, but we need people in the room that's got more say in government section to push anti-government to make the energy renewables sort of easy for us to cater for, like to us to look after ourselves and have a social. Yesterday I heard a good debate about Victorian Premier against a community member, Aaron, and I agree with Aaron because you can't make decisions without the government by itself. You need that people that are on the ground, that experience, lived ground, to work with the government to make things possible for people that's living with prepaid smart meters. So I'm hoping that everybody in here can sort of like push anti-government a bit to make it life easier for Aboriginal people in the NT.
Thank you. And Lauren.
Yeah, I think probably beyond, in addition to all of those things, let's make prepayment metering redundant by making sure that governments everywhere and our investment partners and industry are investing in the solutions, which is lower cost clean energy, so everyone can afford to stay connected to these essential services. So we've got projects for Original Power that are working really hard at that critical risk centre to understand how we get project development across the line with a range of blended finance models. This is really important to getting a blueprint for the development, the fast tracking of First Nations benefit community energy. So we're doing that sort of work. If you are in any way aligned with any of those things, please come and have a chat to us about how we can work with you on projects across the country, not just in the Northern Territory, but fundamentally we're working to ensure this happens in prepayment communities first so that people aren't left behind on the least affordable energy as the most excluded customer while the transition happens around us. So, yeah, I know we can do it.
Thank you. Can I ask you to thank our panel, please?